Awesome. So something that we're going to do, I already mentioned that talking about racism work is very, very difficult. It can be hard. It can bring up some, um, for some, past trauma. For others, some feelings of like guilt or defense or something, any of those feelings, a broad range of feelings. And one of the things that I want to set the groundwork in the very beginning is these 4 agreements for courageous conversations. So the first one is we want to agree, all of us are wanting to agree to stay engaged and to stay involved in the content. I think sometimes when we're uncomfortable, psychologically, we want to do the safest thing possible, and sometimes that's just tuning out of the content. And so what I want to challenge you to do and ask yourselves to push yourselves through is to stay engaged in the conversation, stay engaged in the content no matter how hard it gets. The second piece is I want you to realize and agree to experiencing feelings of discomfort, acknowledging that you will get uncomfortable. Again, these conversations are so hard. Honestly, me and Linz don't know it all, and I don't pretend to be an expert in this. I am not. Just because I'm Black doesn't mean I got, this whole diversity, equity, and inclusion thing down pat. And so I want to really encourage y'all to sit, when it feels like hard and you're pushing through, to sit in that and to feel those feelings of discomfort. The third is to speak truth. All of us are coming from completely different positions and places and perspectives, and have different stories. And so I want you to feel safe enough to speak your truth and be open about your feelings and your thoughts and everything like that. And know that, I'm not going to be offended if you're completely unaware of stuff, but you've chosen to be here, and that's a step in a direction. That's a positive step in a direction. So committing to telling and speaking your truth. And then the final thing is expect and accept non-closure, getting uncomfortable in certainty. We are talking about racism, a system that was built over hundreds and hundreds of years. A time for about 45 minutes to an hour is not going to solve that. It's not going to solve it in us. It's not going to solve it in you. And so just be comfortable with acknowledging the journey of what anti-racism is, what active listening is, and just be uncomfortable or be comfortable with it not being a concrete answer moving forward. Next thing is, these are some of the takeaways that we want y'all to have. Some of the expected takeaways are: develop skills to better your ability to listen to others, to learn how to hold space through empathy and humility for others who are different from yourself, and then understand the role of an anti-racist is constantly active. Lindsay, I believe this is yours.
Yeah. Okay, so we want to take some time to unpack what active listening is. So we all come from different backgrounds on this call. We have different views. We maybe grew up in different places. But I would really argue that it's not our differences that divide us, even in this polarized political climate that we live in. It's not necessarily our differences that divide us, but it's the fact that we can or can't make space for people to process and listen to one another. So I really believe that if we are able to listen and create space for each other, we can really hear one another if we practice active listening. And if we aren't able to do that, then obviously we're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to be able to have a conversation or engage in dialogue. So this is something that we want to seek to practice. And active listening is not necessarily something that you get taught in everyday life, especially as an adult, unless you took communication classes in college. But active listening is something that we don't often talk about or think about. It's just, something that's a part of life, is listening to another person and talking. So we really want to refine this skill and make some space for us to be able to press into this a little bit more. So that being said, I would love for a few of you to share what characteristics of a good listener are, in your opinion. So anyone, feel free to unmute your mic and just share something that comes to mind about being a good listener.
Eye contact.
That's great.
Reflecting back what the other person has said.
Yes, that's great.
Love it.
I would say allowing, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Hey, Beto. I would say allowing space for silence and reflection.
I'd say nonverbal communication. So like a nod, leaning in.
That's great. I love it. Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing, y'all. Those are really, really good ads. Does anybody have maybe one more person share? If not, it's totally fine. We'll move on.
Not interrupting with your own thoughts.
Yes. Oh my gosh. All right. We got some good listeners on this call, man. Okay. But moving forward, looking at what an active listener, we kind of wanted to give like a working definition for our time together too. So the intentional active listening is the intentional act of listening with all of your senses, fully concentrating and understanding, responding and remembering what is being said by the speaker. And just to give like even context to tease a little bit for the anti-racism work, is that active listening is kind of like an internal and an external thing that's working in tandem, right? It is when somebody is sharing their story, sharing their experience, you are intently listening with all of your senses externally, but internally processing and like connecting deeply with what that other person is saying. And so even active listening requires empathy and humility. The ability to take on or understand another's perspective, even if you don't understand it, but just to even imagine like that whatever perspective that they're sharing or that story that they're sharing, to imagine what that person could possibly be feeling, even if it's in the slightest, and really connecting on that deeper level. Being non-judgmental, keeping an open mind. So even when somebody's sharing something that you might not even connect with, like I even had a conversation earlier today that I completely disagree with this person on, I mean, everything. But the matter is, it's like, it's not in those moments about being right. It's actually about hearing and listening to the other person, right? And so keeping an open mind about where they're coming from. Recognizing emotion in others. So whether they're upset, hyped up, happy, sad, we want to, in those moments, in active listening, want to feel and engage with that person. And then lastly, the ability to communicate what you see in another person, reflecting back. I believe somebody said that, Deb, I believe that was you, reflecting back to the speaker of what you hear, and really letting them know that I hear you and I see you. And so these are some phrases that you could even use. We wanted to provide like some context for it. So reflecting back, summarizing. So example of this would be, what I heard you say was, it sounds like you feel like X, Y, Z. Tell me more about what you meant by blank, blank, blank. I noticed you were talking about some really hard things, but you seem very nonchalant. Can you tell me more about what that's about? All of these are reflecting back and summarizing in a conversation and letting that other person know, again, I not only see you and hear what you're saying, but I am listening to what you're saying. I'm deeply resonating, not even deeply resonating, but connecting with what you're saying. And I want you to know that we're in this conversation together.
Okay, so this next part, we are going to jump into a listening activity in a little bit. But wherever you are, in your house, your apartment, in your office, outside, just kind of use your posture and sit up straight, kind of move around, maybe put your feet on the ground, whatever you need to do to feel comfortable and feel like you are engaged. So much of active listening is really preparing yourself to actively listen to another person. So being fully present to another person, your mind, body, spirit, and then physically demonstrating that you are listening. So being attentive, your nonverbal behaviors. I think Beto had said that before. So your head nodding, body posture, eye contact, and also not fidgeting with something. I think oftentimes when we're listening to someone, we might grab our phone or start fidgeting with something that we're holding. So this is really important to be able to be present with the speaker. And then also internally demonstrating that you're listening by avoiding other thoughts that might come to your mind. So I think it's really, this happens often where we're thinking about something while another person is talking, but learning how to suspend all of those other thoughts and really be present with the other person as they are sharing something with you. Perfect. So feel free to answer any of these questions if you'd like, or just reflect back what your conversation was like.
I'll go. I think it was so easy to connect with Beto, even though we're many generations apart. We instantly connected in various commonalities, and he seemed very engaged, and I loved. In fact, you cut us off too soon. I didn't get to hear everything.
That's great. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, I was gonna say it was a lot of fun. I did notice myself. I felt instantly that there was a connection to what she was sharing about, and I was like, "Oh, I want to capture that so bad," But I like had to wait till the end, which isn't even a long time. I was just like, "Oh, I know there's something there that's like wonderful and beautiful," and we did get to talk about it afterwards, so it was great.
That's great. Thank you.
I also resonate with that. I feel like when I was like, oh, wait, I have a connection to that, like my gut instinct was to just like interject and say that. But yeah, having to like pause and wait a few more seconds was, had something to be more aware about.
Yeah, it's very easy to want to interject your story when listening to another person, especially when you connect with something, with what they're saying. But it's really important with active listening to really hear the other person out and then be able to kind of reflect back. Yeah, that's great. Anyone else? Maybe one more person? If not, that's okay. Okay. I'm glad that y'all enjoyed this. I think it can be, this question maybe is a little bit easier to connect with. It's not so much of a intense question, or, you're not necessarily talking about something that you disagree with, but in these conversations, when we're actively practicing listening to another person that we disagree with, our emotions become involved. We might become very frustrated, very angry, really upset, and want to interject or share or cut them off, or we just don't hear fully what they're saying. So it's really important to also pay attention to your body and what is going on for you as you are listening to another person. I know for me, in interacting with people that are different than me or share completely different views, it's really hard to be able to listen to their perspective. But this is, active listening is obviously for listening to everyone and anyone that you come in contact with, but also listening to people that don't share your same views. And that can be really hard when the other person doesn't know how to actively listen to you. So maybe they need to attend this workshop. But it's really important to learn how to make space for the other person. And so much of that is learning how to reflect back and to empathize and be someone that is fully present to the other person.
Yes, thanks so much. So we're moving on to the becoming an anti-racist portion here. And one thing that I was just reflecting on this workshop this morning, and I think it's so the concept racism is so complex. Like it's not like just like a behavior, and I think that's where we get that misconception, and we're taught along the way that it's just a behavior. It's people calling somebody a name or something like that, but the racism is like an ideology. It's societal, it's structural, it is like embedded in American society. Like people who come from other countries and visit here say that it is another animal in the US. And I think we're like fish in water. We just don't see it as much. Well, I do, but I think when we talk about anti-racism coupled with active listening, again, it is an internal work and an external work. Like you are constantly unlearning, unrooting all of these internalized things that you believe to be just normal, and actually replacing them with things that are true, that are in fact, that when you sit and listen to somebody else's experience, when you're actively listening to somebody else's experience, that means you are moving aside what you believe to be true, and in this moment centering the experiences of another person. And so being an anti-racist in this moment is not just about calling out racism or dismantling systems of oppression, because like, you know, I think that's what kind of gets lost in this moment too, about, yes, we got to take down all these things that are wrong. Like we need to call out what's wrong. Hey, Black person, tell me about all like your trauma and all this stuff. But what it means to also be anti-racist, along with those things, it says, you know what, my BIPOC friends, I want to advocate for normalizing your everyday experiences and your life. You know, like you are advocating for, you know, them to just be able to live their life. You know, it would be great to where we get to a point where we don't say like the first Black person this. It would be like this person did an amazing job, that, and we just say their name. They don't have to be a first. You know what I'm saying? And so to be anti-racist, we are advocating for the normalization of everyday experiences and lives of Black, Indigenous, and brown folks. It is a fight for their right to exist and to matter. So, sorry, I went on a little bit of a rant. I went past my time there. But anyways, no one is born racist or anti-racist. This is a result from the choices we make, our upbringing, and all of the things that we surround ourselves with, right? Lindsay?
So for those of you who are here at this workshop, you probably are aware of what being racist or anti-racist is, but just so we're all clear on what this is, we just wanted to give some definitions for you all. So the first one we have here is racism. So a really easy way to think about racism is racial prejudice plus power. So the belief that one group of people are better than another based on skin color, which is reflected in our systems, in our institutions, in our interpersonal interactions, and our internalized beliefs. So again, racism is not just an individual act. This is something that is embedded into our education system, our criminal justice system. Every system that is set up in the United States is essentially a racist system. So we have racist systems, and then we have anti-racist systems or anti-racist people. So it's really important to recognize that racism is, again, not just individual, but it is systemic and a part of all of our institutions in the United States. So anti-racism then is the active process of identifying and eliminating racism by changing the systems, organizational structures, policies, practices, and attitudes so that power is redistributed and shared equitably. So being an anti-racist is something that is active. It's an active process. And we can't just say we're not racist, because actually that is actually perpetuating racism in our society. Active listening, as we talked about earlier, is a huge part of becoming an anti-racist. So the beauty of anti-racism is that you don't have to pretend to be free of racism to be an anti-racist. Anti-racism is the commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including in yourself. And it's the only way forward. So I love this quote because so much of it is about is confronting racism wherever you find it. So whether it's in an institution, in a comment that you hear from someone, or recognizing the biases that you hold in yourself. Okay, and then this next slide we have here is being an anti-racist. So again, it's a lifelong process of daily conscious choices. So that involves educating ourselves, recognizing our privilege, calling people in to learn about racism, and then calling people out for racist behavior, amplifying and listening to marginalized voices, and advocating.
Awesome. So we just want to break down that like section because we just powered through those. And so these are the steps. The first step as far as like becoming an anti-racist and entering into that role. So that's educating yourself. So I feel like, you know, in the last few months, this is where a lot of people are starting out, you know, reading. Where are you getting your books from? Who are you listening to? Where are you learning from? You know, observing, taking in all kinds of information from all kinds of sources, and not just, one prominent news source or another prominent news source that both lean either way. But we want to be able to like get a clear understanding of the picture that's happening, looking at local newspapers, and taking in the information. That's even social media too is a great way you're getting information. Obviously, I say that with a grain of salt, because you don't know that stuff, but like really getting a clear picture. Chatting, understanding. That's with active listening and talking with people and sharing, their experiences and listening to them, and connecting with other people that are different from you. Questioning, for this is not so much questioning other people and saying like, yo, like, what do you think about this? But that's actually questioning and interrogating what you grew up believing. What were you told about Black people? What were you told about brown people? What were you told about these? Whether that would be in your education from your parents, and really interrogating those things and examining those things with a magnifying glass, almost with a microscope at sometimes, and really getting to the root of those things. And then reflecting. So after you've gone through all this process, you're reflecting about what you've learned, what you've taken in, and really, again, examining that. And this quote is, "For only being truthful about how we got here can we begin to imagine another way." I was a history political science major in my undergrad, and so I've always found like history to be incredibly important and crucial. And now more than ever, we need to understand where we've come from to know where we're going to go.
Okay, so this next one that we have for becoming an anti-racist is recognizing privilege. So privilege can feel like an intimidating word at times. And when we talk about privilege, we're talking about unearned advantages or institutional benefits. So the key to this is unearned. So for me, I'm a white woman. I was born into a white family. There's nothing that I could do to change my skin color, to do anything to change my situation as a white person. So this is unearned, and we have to recognize that in our society. I have to recognize that I live in a society that was built for people that look like me, and it privileges people that look like me. So this is something that is a continual process of recognizing privilege. You can start to name it and recognize it, but also, as you continue on this journey to become an anti-racist, there are times when you will get called out and be aware of, oh, I didn't even recognize that, because privilege is something that really blinds us from seeing the ways that we benefit. So this is definitely a process, but is a key to becoming an anti-racist. So we have this quote, "That's exactly the point. When the playing field is uneven to begin with, you don't have to be a bad person to benefit from nasty institutions or unwarranted privilege."
All right, so calling people in to learn about racism. And so when that happens, it typically will happen like this. You're in a group and somebody says something that might make you feel like, I don't like the way that sounded. Like that didn't sound, that was racist. So what this calls you to do is to say, if you call someone in, you're circling back to them about a hurtful or an oppressive conversation that a comment that they made, and you do that in private. It's a one-on-one thing. You are inviting them into a process of learning about that particular situation, and that kind of sounds like, hey, do you have a minute to chat about something you said earlier? And we all can probably pinpoint somebody that we know that probably can be in this workshop or something like it. But it takes, we have to be also aware of the emotional energy that we're expending on some folks, because there are some people that literally are going to dig in and not want to budge on stuff. And so just be aware when you're calling in, and we're going to talk about the next one, which is calling out. But go ahead, Lindsay. Oh, but the quote is, "Where the really sincere white people have got to do work in proving themselves is not among Black victims, but out in the battle lines of where America's racism really exists. It's in their home communities. America's racism is among their own fellow whites. That's where sincere white people really mean to do the work to accomplish the things that they have to do."
Okay, so this next one is calling people out for racist behavior. So this is a little bit different than calling people in. So this is when someone makes a comment in a public space. So if someone makes a comment and it's in front of a bunch of people, and it was harmful to a handful of people in that group or one person, you can call them out for their racist behavior. So if this sounds like that comment was harmful to some of us, please don't repeat it again. And while some people might feel like this is really calling them on the carpet in the moment, or they might feel offended for being called out, they have just offended a group of people or a person in that place. And so we need to hold people accountable for the things that they say or do. And so I think it's really important to use discernment in both of these, in calling people in and then calling people out, depending on the situation, depending on who is there, on who is harmed in that moment, and who is there. So the quote we have here is, "Not speaking the truth reinforces racism. It allows us to believe that it's our normal."
And another step along the way is amplifying and listening to marginalized voices. So I know a lot of like resource lists have gone around and stuff like that. But in many ways, we still need to, and I'm going to use a sociological term here, decolonize kind of like where we're getting our sources of information. So when we look and examine our bookshelf, who is on your bookshelf? Where are you getting your information from? These stories, where are the perspectives that the stories are being told from? Who's even in your neighborhood, examining like who is around you, how are you going to immerse yourself in other cultures and other people, what shows are you watching, and what stories are being told. Again, who are you following on social media, who is in your close circle of friends. I know that there are some people that, I live in a place that's, there's no way for me to like connect with anybody that's different from me. The internet is a beautiful and wonderful thing. I used to say the same thing, and I listen to podcasts from different voices, and I will push through and listen to their stories that make me feel uncomfortable, because like that's their experience and it matters. And so like I think that there's so many different ways to get creative on how we can amplify and listen to marginalized voices, and that even goes beyond just like those things, but even seeing who's correcting us even too. Awesome. And then Michelle Obama, forever First Lady, says, "It starts with self-examination and listening to those whose lives are different than our own. It ends with justice, compassion, and empathy that manifests in our lives and on the streets."
So this next one is advocate. So this can take many forms. We all know that the election is approaching. So advocating for anti-racist policies, one way you can do that is voting. Voting for people that uphold anti-racist policies, people that are for BIPOC people, people that want to seek to reform education, healthcare, housing, immigration, policing, criminal justice. So voting is definitely one way you can advocate. Another way is calling your representatives. They hold a lot of weight, and they can advocate for different policies or different systems that are put in place that affect people of color. One other way is protesting. I know we are in the middle of a pandemic, and I know it is scary and unknown, but we do need people to show up and make noise and demand justice, especially in the case of policing in our nation, especially in the case of Breonna Taylor. We've seen a lot of protests across the country this week in regards to justice for her. And so this is one way that we can advocate and become anti-racist. So I love this quote by Angela Davis. "I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things that I cannot accept." And I think this is so powerful because we are who we've been waiting for. We need people to show up, and we need people to advocate to create a more just world. So this is definitely a way to become anti-racist.
You can go ahead and keep going, Lindsay.
Okay, so this is our last slide. So obviously we've talked about active listening and what that looks like and how we need to be people that are able to perspective take and empathize and show up with humility as we listen to another person that might be different than us or might have different views. And so active listening is really the starting place of anti-racist work, but we also want you all to know that active listening is not the end all be all for anti-racist work. Active listening should be the launch pad for continuing to dismantle racist systems, policies, and attitudes that oppress people of color so that all people can thrive. So active listening is something that we need to continually do with people who are different than us as they share different perspectives, as they share their stories, as they share different things that they've experienced. But it's also not the end all be all. We can't stop at just active listening. We have to continue to move forward as we enter into anti-racist work. And active listening, I will say, continues as we pursue anti-racist work. So you don't come to a point where you just stop actively listening. It's a continual process as we pursue anti-racist work, because if we can't actively listen as we're continuing on this process, then we've actually lost the foundation of anti-racist work.
And I'll just reiterate this too. And the reason why I believe that active listening is much more engaging than just listening, because I think that was something that I heard so much, and I couldn't pinpoint why it bothered me when I heard like a white person say, I'm in a listening posture now, I'm in a listening posture now, I'm in a listening posture now. Because I think it's I think for me to be at the age I'm at, and then to talk to my grandparents and they be the age that they're at, and then talk to my great grandmother who, God rest her soul, just passed away, and to hear what she experienced, that for listening to be that's how you're going to start. I think it's too passive in the moment that we're in right now. I think the next step and the reason why I encourage people to do active listening is because it is a challenge, an internal challenge for you, specifically white folks, I'm talking to you, to engage with the things that are happening internally, with the beliefs that you grew up with, a society that is built to uplift and sustain you and push you. I think that it is a challenge to dismantle those things while simultaneously saying, I'm going to center your experience. I'm going to center the experience and the life of somebody outside of myself. And to be honest, I'll be completely frank. Me as a person of color, as a Black person, I have had a handful of experiences where my life was considered important outside of the trauma that I've experienced as a Black person. Does that make sense? Like, the only time that my life has been centered is through my trauma and pain, not my experience as a person, not as my experience as a human being. And so when I say active listening, and I couple it with anti-racism, and saying that we have to normalize, as an anti-racist, have to normalize the everyday lived experiences of BIPOC folks outside of just trauma and pain. We have to normalize shopping at Black businesses, normalize like listening from Black leaders, normalize leaders in all kinds of conferences and speaking from different spheres. We have to normalize this thing. And that's what it means to be anti-racist. That's what the challenge is, to be an active listener in anti-racism work.
Jonathan and Lindsay, thank you both so much. And if you guys want to give them like some snaps or a nonverbal round of applause, yeah, that was so incredible. I want to leave a little bit of time for questions or things that people are processing. So if you wanted to go ahead and just put in the chat, you know, what is your main takeaway from this workshop? Like if you are going to go ahead and tell someone one thing or just something that hit you, maybe a question, maybe a comment, go ahead and just put that in the chat box. And while other folks are writing that in, or you just went ahead and put it in, we have Jonathan and Lindsay with us right here. And for a few minutes, I want to open up the space to any questions or comments, anything that might be coming up for you right now.